What are the challenges of winemaking in the present and looking towards the future? Welcome to the fourth episode of Winemaking Experiences by Enartis, the podcast dedicated to the world of winemaking. We will take the opportunity to discuss the evolution of fining agents, their importance in the winemaking process, as well as in the final quality of the wine. Join us on a journey to rediscover the origins of fining agents and their evolution to plant-based alternatives, which are capable of satisfying the needs of the most demanding consumers.
Hello, and welcome to the new episode of our podcast. This time, we will be talking about clarification. My name is Oren. I work with Enartis, based out of the Central Valley, and I am joined by Julia. Hello, Julia.
Good morning, Oren, and I am in Sonoma County, Mendocino County, and Lake County of California.
Fun. So cool. I'm glad that you were able to join us today.
Me too. Thank you for being here too.
I appreciate that. So yeah, you and I will be talking a little bit about fining agents, but in addition to some of our, context, we'll also be summarizing some points that came from a conversation between Elena Lopez, who is our technical specialist in Spain, working with Enartis, and she's also the range manager of fining agents. And that conversation is between her and Guillermo Iranzo, who is the commercial manager for Enartis from Valencia, Spain. This provides some interesting information to, whoever's listening about fining agents. So you ready to get into it, Julia?
Let's get into it, Oren.
Do you want to start by kind of telling us a little bit more about the basics of clarifying and fining?
Absolutely, Oren. Fining is used for clarification and filterability improvement, also to prevent haze or sediment in tank and bottle. The main objectives of fining are to improve and preserve wine quality.
Yeah, and my understanding is that you can approach clarifying at any stage of the winemaking process, whether that be juice, must, post-fermentation, right before bottling. Is that true to your experience, Julia?
Exactly. Fining includes all of the stages of winemaking, really, throughout the life of the wine. So you can pre-fermentation, during fermentation, post-fermentation, just depending on what your objective is and how the wine needs to be fined.
And so what sort of reasons would a winemaker might want to clarify their wine?
Okay, or just fine in general. Like, for example, maybe the press fraction, there's a lot of the free run is going to be your highest quality fruit, right? Well, you want to retain, you need for your yield or for how much you're going to, end up with, you're going to want to find that press fraction. So fining helps to remove the harsh polyphenol compounds, including catechins, contributing to bitterness, as well as astringent compounds from stem, seed, and skin tannins. Additionally, processing, fining is a processing aid to reduce turbidity, achieve filterability.
Yeah, it's so interesting that in the past, up until the 1980s, fining and clarifying was only done to reduce turbidity, achieve filtration. It was all very practical in that sense. And only as recent as the 1980s did they start to improve the organoleptic properties of the wine.
Indeed, right. Historical fining tools used since before the 17th century. Winemakers were making use of things that they just had at home. So they were using milk and albumin and fish glue, I guess, for the fishermen, but they were noticing that if they used a little bit of this, they were able to clarify and kind of keep a cleaner wine. So, and then clarification just became a regular practice for winemakers.
Something that was interesting for me to learn, which was that really selective fining for and clarifying for organoleptic improvement really only began in earnest in the 1980s. So it's relatively recent in our history.
Right. We see a shift at that time period when selective clarification is used, for example, for removing those harsh phenolic compounds responsible for oxidative reactions such as specific polyphenols and all metals, resulting in protection for the wine and improving the quality.
That has continued to become more and more important for a winemaker. So we're now looking at current market trends surrounding clarifying being catered more towards improving color tone, reducing wine astringency, eliminating rare aromatic effects. basically all encompassing just being more selective.
Yes.
Even just as, something that in the past we wouldn't have approached it from a clarifying angle. Nowadays we really are. And this might be a good time to kind of talk about, some of the differences in what tools winemakers had in the past in terms of clarifying agents and what some newer technologies, tools have arisen recently, right? In the past, you had mentioned this previously a little bit, we're looking at animal-based fining, right? So gelatin, milk, albumin, isinglass, those are still available today and are still used widely around the US and global industry. There's some negative aspects, notably allergens. If you're allergic to dairy, using dairy in a wine is probably not the best for your consumers. So recently, within the last 2 decades, a lot of studies have been done on the enological application of plant proteins.
Indeed. So a lot of research was done with various categories of plant proteins like legume proteins such as soy, pea, lupine, cereal proteins like wheat, corn, rice, and then tubers like potatoes. The idea initially was to find we had to look at processes and we had to look at different plant proteins to achieve the non-allergen and vegan approach.
Yeah, and that's something that really began back in 1998 at Enartis. We looked at differences in solubility, again, between those categories of plant proteins compared to the animals. We looked at the selection of raw materials. So depending on which material we were looking at, what was cleaning capacity? Did they reduce astringency enough? Did they have impacts on colloidal instability? Did they add or subtract organoleptic characters that were either favorable or unfavorable? Additionally, fining agents, right? So different processes were explored, some such as like temperature management, isoelectric point, hydrophobicity, filtration, all pretty advanced stuff, right? Looking at the different characteristics of the production process that will really lead to the best fining agents. All of this came together, and in 2000, the OIV approved and authorized wheat and pea proteins for use as clarifying agents. After that, it took us till about 2005 to launch our first group of products that were plant proteins for clarifying. This was the Plantis range. And initially, this was actually based off of wheat, funnily enough, but as you can imagine, the issues with sourcing, good raw materials, as well as the addition of gluten meant we were still back in that same boat before as to adding this into wine can affect the allergies for some consumers, right? So in 2009, the Plantis products that we are used to today were launched. And these are pea protein, potato protein based products that aren't introducing allergens and are still as effective as their animal protein counterparts. So that's a lot of information all at once, but it's all really good, helpful background to really understand where did plant protein fining agents come from and how much work was put behind it to make them as effective as they are today.
What we found was that we can use the production process to enhance the effect of fining activity by combining these plant proteins and including a clarification activity from another source. There's a synergistic effect if we also bring in chitosan, which is known for its antimicrobial effect. However, it is a very powerful clarifying agent when it is produced with a certain degree of hydrolysis.
First of all, that's really cool. It's exciting to see like certain products come together. It actually ends up improving that effect, which is so important again for plant-based, because some concerns in the past when plant-based proteins were first being explored and being researched, at high dosages, you could get some of that vegetal properties coming over in the wine. So being able to have that synergistic effect with the pea and potato proteins mixed with chitosan to reduce dosage really allows the efficacy to be comparable to animal protein and have no organoleptic effects.
Indeed, yes.
So let's go ahead and take a quick moment to hear from Jaco Cockrell, who is the sales manager of Enartis South Africa.
In South Africa, we have definitely seen a major uptake in use of plant-based fining products over the last couple of years. The reason for this is mainly due to consumer and major supermarket chain demand. As with all new products, winemakers were reluctant to use it at first. These products are soft on the wines, and we have found that wines produced with plant-based fining products tend to have a more vibrant and crisp color, and the wines are more aromatic, fresher, and more persistent. When combining plant-based products with a specialized ketosane, you supercharge the product, resulting in accelerated action and more compact lees. Larger producers are definitely seeing the benefit in using these products, and the results mitigates the extra cost involved. It is rapidly becoming the norm for fining in the industry and will remain a focus for us. Plant-based fining is without a doubt the future of wine fining.
Thanks, Jaco, for telling us a little bit more about your experience with plant-based fining in South Africa.
One of the biggest selling points that we have for our plant-based products is that they are synergistic.
That's great, because I know that that's such a critical part of the decision-making process on what to use for fining. And on that a little bit more, in the past, or even now, of course, if you're using gelatins, or a lot of the choice that a winemaker is making has to do with their molecular weight. Low molecular weight gelatins are more reactive, and therefore they're better with more stringent tannins. High molecular weights tend to have a greater clarifying power. And just like gelatins, plant proteins also have different molecular weights that also affect their clarifying capacity. So it's still critical for a winemaker to look at, what am I trying to do? What am I trying to accomplish? Because not all proteins on the market are equal. Plant,
Absolutely.
Gelatin, what have you. Julia, what are some of the benefits of the pea protein?
Well, the biggest benefit just from using a plant-based fining product is that it's non-allergenic and it's vegan, right? So that's number one, and that is what the market is starting to demand. But in terms of selective fining actions, benefits of pea protein include preventing or reducing brown color due to oxidation. Additionally, it will remove iron and other metals that act as catalysts in oxidative reactions.
And that makes sense, because it's used, in our experience, more heavily in whites and rosés, which are a little bit more susceptible to that sort of oxidation. So I could also see this being useful during flotation as well.
Absolutely, yes. And fermentation in wine, just as a clarifying agent. Yep. And then potato protein is your go-to, kind of remove those harsh polyphenols, right? So any of those seed or stem or skin tannins that are harsh, and you really kind of want to remove that astringency or bitterness from the wine, that's where the potato protein is an excellent fining product.
Gotcha. So it sounds like, just like when you're approaching fining and clarifying with your animal-based proteins, it's just as important to be selective with what you're using to fine or clarify when you're using plant-based fining agents. It sounds like it's just as important.
Absolutely, because it is all about using the right fining product for the right application.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one really nice thing about all of this development with fining, is that we have just, as the years have passed, as research has advanced, we've just become more selective and targeted in our approach with our fining based off those agents. So let's go back real quickly to something you mentioned earlier briefly, which is vegan wines, right? Vegan wines in comparison to traditional wines. One thing that I thought was really fascinating, and I hadn't thought of this before, is the only difference, or the major difference, between a vegan wine and traditional wine is the clarifying process. Basically, if you as a winemaker choose to use a plant-based fining agent instead of an animal-based fining agent, you can retain that vegan property of wine, again, being just fermented from grapes, up and through your entire winemaking process and actually produce vegan wines.
Indeed, you are preserving the integrity of that wine. It is vegan and it's non-allergenic.
Yeah, it sounds really exciting. And while there may not be a perceived difference in the quality of vegan wines in the market versus traditional, customers seem to be much more drawn towards that wine being plant-based, retaining its vegan status, even if they're not vegans themselves. So that's really critical for winemakers to think about as they move forward.
Yes, that is definitely, it's a market trend that is not going away. It's just growing.
Yeah, for sure. And, it's really important to note also that there is no difference in the shelf life of vegan wines versus a traditional wine. So using these, it's just as effective. It's going to last on the shelf just as long as a traditional wine. So really, it's a win-win.
Excellent point. Yes.
Well, Julia, it was great speaking with you a little bit more about clarifying.
Yes, what a great conversation, Oren. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining me. Have a good rest of your day. And to everyone else listening, we will see you on the next episode. Bye.